"Take her away," the king said, and every soldier obeyed. But before the order could be carried out, something impossible shook the royal fortress. A thunderous roar rolled across the stone courtyards, followed by the deafening shriek of twisting iron. The white beast slammed its massive body against the towering gate with such desperate force that every noble, every guard, and every servant froze where they stood. No one had ever seen the king's legendary guardian defy a command. No one understood why it was trying to escape. Not yet. Hours earlier, the fortress of Frost Hollow had awakened beneath a sky the color of pale steel, its towering walls wrapped in ribbons of morning mist that drifted across the mountain cliffs. The royal kennels rested beyond the eastern courtyard, hidden behind rows of ancient pine trees whose branches whispered whenever the wind swept down from the snowy peaks. Most people avoided the place. The wolves that lived there belonged to the crown, creatures descended from the oldest bloodlines in the kingdom, powerful enough to silence even seasoned warriors with a single warning growl. Only one person entered every morning before sunrise without fear. Evelyn Carter pushed open the weathered wooden gate, carrying 2 heavy buckets of warm water balanced across her shoulders. At 23, she had learned to move quietly enough that even nervous animals trusted her presence. She wasn't a healer, nor a noble, nor someone blessed with remarkable strength. She was simply the forgotten caretaker, an omega whose gentle hands had become more familiar to the wolves than her own voice. While most servants hurried through their duties, Evelyn always paused beside every enclosure, speaking softly to frightened pups, replacing fresh straw, brushing tangled fur, and making certain no creature felt alone. She believed kindness was never wasted, even if no one noticed it. 3 orphan wolf pups waited eagerly beside the smallest pen every morning, their oversized paws clumsy against the wooden floor as their tiny tails wagged with boundless excitement the moment they recognized her footsteps. Ash, Rowan, and Little Frost tumbled over one another, until Evelyn laughed and knelt beside them. They pressed against her knees, competing for her attention as she scratched behind their ears and whispered each of their names. They had lost their mother during a brutal winter storm months ago, and from that day forward they had refused food from anyone except Evelyn. The kennel masters complained constantly that the pups were becoming too attached to a mere servant, but every attempt to separate them ended the same way. The pups would cry through the night until Evelyn returned. Beyond their enclosure stood another gate built entirely from black iron, taller than any man and reinforced with thick chains forged by the royal blacksmith himself. Behind it rested the white beast. Larger than any ordinary wolf, its snow-white coat shimmered beneath the filtered morning light, while pale silver eyes watched the world with quiet intelligence. Stories claimed the beast had stood beside generations of kings, choosing only one ruler each century. It obeyed no one except the throne itself. Visitors rarely lasted more than a few seconds beneath its piercing gaze before retreating in silence. Yet every morning, while Evelyn cared for the pups, the white beast remained perfectly still, its enormous head resting between its front paws as those silver eyes followed her every movement. She had always assumed it was simply watching over the young wolves. She never imagined it had been watching her all along. The quiet rhythm of the kennels changed the moment the bronze signal horn echoed across Frost Hollow. Every servant immediately straightened, every stable master lowered his head, and every guard shifted into perfect formation. The king was coming. Evelyn gently placed the last bowl of fresh water inside the pup's enclosure before brushing loose straw from her simple gray apron. She knew the rules. Royal inspections were never meant for people like her. Invisible servants stayed silent, finished their work, and disappeared before noble eyes could notice them. Ash nudged her boot with his tiny nose, followed by Rowan climbing clumsily onto her foot, while Little Frost rolled onto his back, demanding one more scratch beneath his chin. Evelyn smiled despite herself. "I have to go," she whispered softly. "Please behave today." The pups answered with small playful whines that sounded almost like complaints. Behind the towering black iron gate, the white beast slowly lifted its head. Its silver eyes remained fixed on Evelyn with the same calm intensity she had grown accustomed to over countless mornings. She offered the giant wolf a respectful nod before gathering her empty buckets. She never expected a response. Yet this morning, The beast blinked once, almost thoughtfully, before returning its gaze toward the approaching courtyard. Boots struck the stone path outside in perfect rhythm. Royal banners carrying the silver wolf crest appeared first, followed by armored guards whose polished breastplates reflected the pale mountain sunlight. Behind them walked King Lucian Ashford. He carried himself with the effortless confidence of someone who had never questioned whether the world would obey him. His dark navy cloak drifted behind him in the cold breeze, and although he looked no older than his early 30s, every servant instinctively lowered their eyes the moment he entered the kennels. Stories described him as fair, disciplined, and impossible to deceive. Others whispered that his heart had grown as cold as the northern mountains after years of carrying the weight of the crown alone. Evelyn had never spoken to him. She doubted he even knew she existed. Lord Victor Blackwell, the king's senior advisor, stepped forward with an approving smile as he gestured toward the spotless kennels. "Everything has been prepared exactly as requested, Your Majesty." Lucian quietly observed each enclosure without speaking. He noticed the clean bedding, the polished feeding bowls, the healthy wolves, and the peaceful atmosphere. Nothing escaped his attention. When his eyes reached the smallest enclosure, Ash immediately bounded toward the fence with excited little hops, followed by Rowan and Frost. Instead of greeting the king or his guards, all three pups stared directly at Evelyn, who had instinctively stepped backward toward the wall to avoid interrupting the inspection. Lord Victor's pleasant expression disappeared. His sharp eyes narrowed as he watched the pups ignore every royal presence in favor of an ordinary caretaker. "That attachment has become unhealthy," he said quietly. "Royal blood should not become dependent upon a servant." Evelyn lowered her gaze without speaking. She knew better than to defend herself. One of the kennel masters cleared his throat nervously. "She has only been feeding them, my lord. They are still very young." Victor dismissed the explanation with a slight wave of his hand. Dependency begins with small habits. Lucian remained silent for several long moments. His attention drifted toward the three pups pressing themselves against the wooden fence, refusing to look anywhere except at Evelyn. Then he spoke in a calm, measured voice that carried across the entire kennel. "Remove her from the royal nursery. Beginning today, another caretaker will attend the pups." The words landed with quiet finality. Evelyn felt her heartbeat stumble, but she simply bowed her head. "Yes, Your Majesty," she answered softly. She took one careful step backward, preparing to leave exactly as ordered, never noticing that behind the black iron gate, the white beast had risen completely to its feet. For a heartbeat, the entire kennel remained perfectly still. Evelyn lowered her eyes once more, accepting the king's decision without protest. She had learned long ago that arguing against fate only made the disappointment linger longer. Quietly, she placed the empty wooden buckets beside the gate, folded her worn gloves into her apron pocket, and offered the three pups one final gentle smile. "Be good," she whispered so softly that only they could hear. Ash immediately pressed both tiny front paws against the fence, his bright eyes following her every movement. Rowan began pacing back and forth with restless little steps, letting out a confused whine that echoed through the enclosure. Frost, usually the calmest of the three, sat perfectly still, staring at Evelyn with wide silver blue eyes that reflected more understanding than any pup should possess. The newly assigned caretaker approached carrying fresh supplies, but the moment he opened the enclosure door, none of the pups moved toward him. They remained fixed on Evelyn as if everything else around them had suddenly disappeared. "Come along now," the man said kindly, kneeling with a bowl of warm goat's milk. Ash barely glanced at it. Rowan backed away. Frost quietly lowered his head. An uncomfortable silence settled over the royal party. Lord Victor frowned. "They will adjust," he said confidently. "Animals always do." Evelyn forced herself to keep walking. Every instinct urged her to turn around, to comfort the frightened little wolves one last time, but she respected the king's order too much to hesitate. She stepped beyond the nursery gate and entered the stone pathway leading toward the servants' quarters. Behind her came another soft cry from Ash, answered almost immediately by Rowan and Frost. Their small voices blended into a lonely chorus that tugged at something deep inside her heart. She tightened her grip on the empty buckets without looking back. Inside the black iron enclosure, the white beast slowly rose to its full height. The chains securing the enormous gate gave a faint metallic rattle as the giant wolf took a single measured step forward. One guard noticed the movement and instinctively rested a hand on the hilt of his ceremonial sword before quickly realizing the beast showed no sign of aggression. It simply stood there, watching Evelyn disappear farther down the path. King Lucian observed the majestic animal from the corner of his eye. During every inspection over the past decade, the white beast had remained calm, disciplined, and completely indifferent to servants passing through the courtyard. Today was different. The wolf did not acknowledge the king. It did not look toward the pups. Its unwavering attention remained fixed on the lone gray figure walking away beneath the towering pines. Lord Victor noticed it next. "Interesting," he murmured, attempting a polite smile. "Perhaps it simply dislikes change." Lucian did not answer. Something about the beast's posture felt unfamiliar. It was not restless. It was waiting. Evelyn continued down the stone walkway until she reached the old archway separating the kennels from the lower gardens. The mountain breeze carried the scent of pine needles and melting snow, and she paused only long enough to steady her breathing before continuing toward her next assignment. She told herself the pups would eventually accept their new caretaker. They deserved stability, not her sadness. Then, behind her, the peaceful morning shattered beneath a single earth-shaking roar. Birds exploded from the treetops. Horses in the nearby stables reared nervously. Every servant froze where they stood. Evelyn stopped instinctively, her heart racing as the impossible sound rolled across Frost Hollow like distant thunder. Slowly, almost afraid of what she might see, she turned toward the kennels. Across the courtyard, beyond rows of startled guards and stunned nobles, the white beast stood directly before the towering black iron gate. Its silver eyes locked on hers with unmistakable determination. The silence lasted only a fraction of a second before the white beast surged forward with breathtaking force. The heavy iron chains stretched tight, and the enormous gate groaned beneath the impact, its deep metallic echo rolling through every corner of Frost Hollow. Gasps rippled across the courtyard. Stable hands instinctively stepped backward while several royal guards exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had ever witnessed the legendary guardian behave this way. Evelyn stood frozen beneath the stone archway, the empty bucket slipping slightly in her trembling hands. Her first instinct was not fear, but concern. The white beast had never shown anger in all the months she had quietly cared for the kennels. Every morning it had watched in complete silence, calm and dignified, like an ancient spirit guarding the kingdom itself. Seeing those silver eyes now filled with unmistakable urgency made her heart ache in a way she could not explain. King Lucian slowly raised one hand, signaling every guard to remain exactly where they were. His expression remained composed, but his sharp blue eyes never left the giant wolf. "Hold your positions," he said evenly. "No one approaches the enclosure." The guards immediately obeyed. Lord Victor attempted a reassuring smile, although uncertainty had begun to creep into his voice. "Perhaps the beast has become unsettled by the pups. They will calm it shortly." As if answering him, Ash squeezed through the small opening inside the nursery fence and hurried toward the great enclosure. Rowan and Frost followed close behind, their tiny paws scrambling across the stone floor. Instead of hiding from the massive guardian, the three pups gathered only a few feet away from the iron gate and looked toward Evelyn together. Their soft cries blended with the low rumble vibrating inside the white beast's chest. It was not the sound of a threat. It was almost a call. The enormous wolf lowered its head toward the pups before lifting its gaze back to Evelyn once again. The mountain wind swept across the courtyard, carrying strands of her chestnut hair across her face. She reached up absent-mindedly to brush them away, never noticing that the white beast mirrored the movement by taking another deliberate step closer to the gate. The thick iron bars shuddered beneath its weight. Chains rattled loudly against the stone pillars. Every noble watching from the upper balcony instinctively leaned forward. Royal records stretched back hundreds of years, yet none described the guardian seeking anyone outside the royal bloodline. Lucian narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. He had spent his entire life beside the white beast. As a young prince, he had learned its habits, earned its trust, and respected the mysterious instincts that no trainer had ever managed to control. It never acted without reason. Never. Open the side gate, Lord Victor suddenly suggested. We should separate the pups before they become frightened. No, Lucian answered immediately. His voice remained calm, but it carried enough authority to end the discussion. Look carefully. Victor followed the king's gaze. The pups were not afraid. Ash had settled quietly beside the gate with his little tail wrapped around his paws. Rowan sat beside his brother. Frost rested against the cold iron, his tiny eyes fixed on Evelyn just as the white beasts were. It was as though all four wolves shared the same silent purpose. Evelyn finally gathered the courage to speak, though her voice barely rose above a whisper. Your Majesty, if my presence is upsetting them, I can leave immediately. Lucian turned toward her for the first time since giving his order. Before he could answer, another deep roar rolled across the fortress. The white beast pressed its broad shoulders against the ancient iron gate once more. The hinges groaned. Fine flakes of rust drifted into the air. Hairline cracks spread across the weathered stone where the gate had stood unmoved for generations. Every heartbeat seemed to stop as the impossible realization settled over the stunned crowd. The Guardian was not trying to escape the fortress. It was trying to reach one ordinary woman who had never once believed she mattered. No one moved. Even the mountain wind seemed to hesitate as every pair of eyes remained fixed on the towering enclosure. The white beast stood with unwavering determination before the ancient gate, its broad chest rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths. It did not roar again. It did not threaten the guards or bare its teeth. Instead, it placed one enormous paw against the iron bars and held it there, as though the barrier itself had become the only obstacle between it and the person it refused to lose sight of. Evelyn's heartbeat echoed in her ears. She had spent countless mornings only a few yards from the legendary Guardian, never once believing it had noticed her beyond polite curiosity. Now its steady gaze never wavered. She instinctively took a small step backward, hoping the distance might calm the situation. The moment her foot touched the next stone, the white beast leaned farther into the gate. The heavy hinges groaned again, and another shower of rust drifted gently onto the courtyard below. A murmur swept through the nobles gathered along the balconies. Some whispered ancient superstitions while others searched the king's face for an explanation he did not yet possess. Lord Victor folded his hands behind his back, attempting to recover his confidence. Your Majesty, this proves the enclosure is overdue for repairs. The gate has endured centuries of harsh winters. Lucian did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the white beast, studying every subtle movement with careful precision. The Guardian was not acting like an animal trapped by fear or confusion. Every motion carried intention. Every pause felt measured. It pressed against the gate only when Evelyn drifted farther away, then became perfectly still the moment she stopped walking. The pattern was impossible to ignore. One of the younger guards quietly swallowed before speaking. Your Majesty, it almost looks as though it is asking her not to leave. Several older soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, but said nothing. None wished to give voice to an idea that sounded almost impossible. Evelyn lowered the buckets onto the ground and slowly raised her empty hands where the beast could clearly see them. Easy, she whispered gently, using the same calm tone she had always used with frightened pups. Everyone is safe. The effect was immediate. The low rumble in the white beast's chest softened into complete silence. Its ears relaxed. Its posture eased. The giant wolf remained behind the iron barrier, but the tension flowing through its powerful frame faded as though her voice alone had lifted an invisible weight. Ash barked once with obvious excitement. Rowan happily circled his brother while Frost settled comfortably beside the gate, resting against the cold iron as if he had been waiting for exactly this moment. The three pups appeared completely at peace, their earlier distress replaced by quiet certainty. Lucian noticed every detail. They were following the white beast's emotions, not creating them. His thoughtful expression deepened. Since childhood, he had been taught that the Guardian recognized truths long before people did. It sensed loyalty before words were spoken, kindness before deeds were celebrated, and danger before it appeared. Yet never in living memory had it shown such unmistakable devotion towards someone outside the royal family. Evelyn herself looked more bewildered than anyone else. Your Majesty, she said carefully, I truly do not understand what is happening. Before Lucian could respond, a deep metallic crack echoed across the courtyard. It was not loud enough to inspire panic, but it was impossible to mistake. Every head turned toward the base of the enclosure. One of the thick iron hinges had shifted ever so slightly beneath the steady pressure of the white beast. It had not forced its way through. It had not lashed out in anger. It had simply refused to step away. And somehow, the ancient gate that had stood unmoved for generations had begun, little by little, to give way before its quiet resolve. The quiet crack of shifting iron echoed through the courtyard like the turning of an ancient key. No one breathed. No one dared to speak. The white beast remained perfectly composed, its immense frame pressed firmly against the weathered gate with unwavering patience rather than fury. Another slow push followed. The old hinges groaned, and the thick chain stretched just enough for everyone to hear the unmistakable sound of metal yielding after centuries of standing firm. Lord Victor instinctively stepped backward. "Your Majesty, this cannot continue," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "The Guardian has never ignored the royal enclosure." Lucian raised one hand, silencing him before another word could be spoken. His attention never left the white beast. He knew the creature better than anyone alive. If it had truly wished to escape by force, the guards would already be scrambling across the courtyard. Instead, it waited between every movement, watching only Evelyn as though asking for permission rather than taking it. The difference unsettled him more than any display of strength could have. Evelyn slowly bent down and lifted the empty buckets from the ground, hoping that continuing to leave might restore the morning to normal. She managed only 2 careful steps before another deep groan rolled through the ancient gate. She stopped instinctively. The sound stopped as well. Confusion spread across her face. She looked toward the white beast, whose silver eyes remained calm, focused, and strangely hopeful. It was almost as if every movement she made was reflected in its own decisions. Ash suddenly slipped through the narrow opening beneath the nursery fence and hurried toward Evelyn without hesitation. Rowan and Frost followed only seconds later, their tiny paws tapping across the stone path until they gathered around her boots. The young caretaker knelt automatically, wrapping gentle arms around the 3 excited pups as they nuzzled against her apron. Soft laughter escaped her despite the extraordinary moment unfolding around her. "You 3 always know how to find me," she whispered with a warm smile. The instant the pups reached her, the white beast relaxed completely. The low tension that had held its powerful body disappeared. Its tail gave one slow, almost relieved sweep across the ground before it rested its broad head against the iron bars. Every witness noticed the change. One elderly kennel master quietly removed his cap. "I have worked here for 42 years, he murmured almost to himself. "I have never seen the Guardian look at anyone that way." Lucian heard every word. Deep within his memory, fragments of lessons from his childhood slowly returned. His grandfather had once warned him that the white beast did not merely protect the throne. It recognized hearts untouched by pride. It chose those whose kindness remained constant whether anyone was watching or not. At the time, Lucian had dismissed the old stories as comforting legends meant to inspire future rulers. Now those forgotten words echoed with unsettling clarity. A final creak rose from the gate as one of the ancient locking pins quietly slipped free under the accumulated strain. The massive iron door shifted outward only a few inches before settling into place. The opening was narrow, barely enough for daylight to pass through, yet it was enough to prove the impossible. The Guardian had opened the barrier that generations believed could never move without the king's command. The white beast did not rush through the gap. It simply stepped forward with quiet dignity until its nose reached the opening. Then, with extraordinary gentleness, it lowered its head toward Evelyn. She hesitated only a moment before extending one trembling hand. The instant her fingertips rested softly against the warm white fur between its eyes, the entire courtyard seemed to fall into complete silence, as though even the mountain itself had paused to witness a moment that would soon change the destiny of Frost Hollow forever. The moment Evelyn's hand rested against the white beast's snowy fur, a calm unlike anything the fortress had ever known settled over the courtyard. The giant guardian slowly closed its silver eyes, releasing a long, peaceful breath that carried across the silent gathering. There was no tension left in its powerful posture, only quiet trust. Ash, Rowan, and Frost nestled happily around Evelyn's knees, their tiny tails sweeping across the stone as though they had finally found exactly where they belonged. No command had brought them together. No training had taught them this. Every choice had been their own. King Lucian remained motionless, unable to pull his gaze away from the extraordinary scene unfolding before him. Throughout his life, the white beast had accepted respect from countless rulers, generals, and elders, yet it had never offered this kind of quiet affection to anyone. It was not obedience. It was recognition. Lord Victor finally broke the silence. "Your Majesty, perhaps the guardian has become unusually attached after spending too much time near the nursery." His explanation sounded weak even to his own ears. Before Lucian could answer, another voice rose from the crowd. "That is not what this is." Every head turned toward the elderly royal healer, Margaret Whitmore, who had served 3 generations of the Ashford family. Leaning lightly upon her carved oak cane, she slowly stepped into the courtyard, her wise gray eyes fixed upon the white beast and the young Omega beside it. "I have waited many years to see whether the old records were true," she said quietly. "Today they have answered." Lord Victor frowned. "Old records?" Margaret nodded. "Long before this fortress was built, before our kingdom carried the Ashford name, the White Guardians were never bound only to kings. They also recognized those blessed with what our ancestors called Moon's Mercy." Curious whispers spread through the nobles gathered on the balconies. The younger guards exchanged puzzled looks, while several elderly servants lowered their heads as if they had heard fragments of the ancient legend during childhood. Lucian studied the healer carefully. "Continue," he said. Margaret smiled gently before looking toward Evelyn, who still knelt beside the white beast with quiet uncertainty. Moon's mercy was never measured by noble birth or rank. It appeared in those who offered compassion without expecting reward, who protected the weak without seeking recognition, and whose kindness remained unchanged whether anyone praised them or ignored them. Evelyn blinked in surprise. "That cannot be me," she said softly. "I have only cared for the wolves because they needed someone." Margaret's warm smile deepened. "Exactly." The white beast slowly opened its eyes and gently lowered its massive head until it rested beside Evelyn's shoulder. There was no fear in the gesture, only complete confidence. Ash climbed carefully into her lap, while Rowan leaned against her arm and Frost settled comfortably at her side. It was as though every wolf in the courtyard had reached the same conclusion long before any human had. Lucian felt something shift within him. He replayed every moment of the morning in perfect sequence. The spotless kennels, the healthy pups, the quiet respect shown by every animal, the guardian refusing to look away as Evelyn walked toward the gate. None of it had happened by chance. He slowly stepped forward until he stood only a few feet away. For the first time since entering the kennels, he truly looked at the young woman standing before him. He no longer saw an unnoticed servant in a simple gray apron. He saw someone whose quiet kindness had earned the trust of the one creature that could never be deceived. And in that unforgettable moment, King Lucian began to wonder whether his own judgment had failed where the white beast had seen the truth from the very beginning. The courtyard remained wrapped in reverent silence as King Lucian took another slow step forward. Every guard instinctively shifted aside, creating a clear path between the throne's ruler and the young caretaker who had never expected to stand at the center of the kingdom's attention. Evelyn rose carefully to her feet, still surrounded by Ash, Rowan, and Frost, while the white beast remained peacefully beside her with its great head lowered in quiet contentment. She felt dozens of eyes upon her and wished more than anything that the morning could return to its ordinary routine. "Your Majesty," she said softly, lowering her gaze with respectful humility, "I never intended to disrupt the inspection. If I have done something improper, I accept whatever decision you make." Lucian studied her expression carefully. There was no triumph in her voice, no expectation of reward, and no attempt to use the extraordinary moment for her own benefit. She appeared genuinely concerned that the disturbance might have inconvenienced the kingdom. That simple thought struck him more deeply than he expected. Most people standing before a king sought favor, recognition, or influence. Evelyn sought only peace. Before Lucian could answer, the white beast quietly stepped through the narrow opening in the loosened gate. Every guard instinctively stiffened, but none drew a weapon after remembering the king's earlier command. The enormous guardian crossed the remaining distance with slow, measured steps until it stood directly between Lucian and Evelyn. Rather than blocking either of them, it calmly turned its body sideways, creating a shared space instead of a barrier. Margaret Whitmore smiled knowingly. "It is inviting understanding," she said gently, "not choosing one over the other." Lucian met the healer's eyes. "Can you be certain?" "After 50 years studying the old chronicles," Margaret replied, "I have never been more certain of anything." The king looked back toward the white beast. Slowly, with the same calm dignity that had guided every decision since childhood, he extended one open hand toward its shoulder. The guardian accepted the familiar touch without hesitation. Then, almost immediately, it turned its head toward Evelyn and lightly brushed the side of her sleeve with its nose before returning its attention to Lucian. The gesture was simple, but its meaning could not have been clearer. It trusted them both. The realization settled over the courtyard like warm sunlight breaking through winter clouds. Ash barked happily and bounced toward Lucian's boots before trotting back to Evelyn again, as if encouraging them to take one more step closer. Rowan copied his brother with playful enthusiasm, while Frost calmly rested against the white beast's front leg. Gentle laughter spread among the servants for the first time that morning. Even several royal guards found themselves smiling. Lucian finally spoke, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard with calm sincerity rather than command. "Evelyn Carter, I judge your place here by your title instead of your character." She looked up in surprise. "Your Majesty." He slowly shook his head. "The Guardian has reminded me that wisdom is not measured by rank alone." Lord Victor lowered his eyes, unable to challenge what every witness had seen with their own eyes. The spotless kennels, the devoted pups, the white beast's unwavering trust, and the ancient legends spoken by the royal healer had formed a truth too clear to deny. Lucian turned toward the gathered nobles and servants. "From this day forward, no one will question Evelyn's right to care for the royal wolves." A quiet wave of astonishment swept through the crowd, but before anyone could respond, the white beast lifted its head toward the bright mountain sky and released one long, peaceful call that echoed across Frost Hollow, carrying with it the unmistakable feeling that an old promise, forgotten for generations, had finally found its way home. The days that followed brought a quiet transformation to Frost Hollow that no royal decree alone could have accomplished. Each sunrise found Evelyn walking the familiar stone path toward the kennels with Ash, Rowan, and Frost happily racing ahead of her, while the white beast waited with the same calm patience that had astonished the entire kingdom. Yet what surprised everyone even more was how quickly fear gave way to respect. Servants who had once hurried past without acknowledging the young Omega now greeted her with warm smiles. Experienced kennel masters began asking for her advice when anxious wolves refused to eat or frightened pups struggled to trust unfamiliar hands. Evelyn answered every question with the same gentle humility she had always carried, never speaking of the extraordinary day that had changed her life. To her, the animals still came first. One crisp autumn morning, King Lucian returned to the royal kennels without ceremony or royal procession. Dressed in a simple dark coat instead of formal robes, he found Evelyn sitting beneath the old pine trees while Ash slept peacefully across her boots. Rowan chased falling leaves, and Frost leaned comfortably against the white beast's enormous side. For several quiet moments, Lucian simply watched. The wolves were completely at ease. So was the guardian that generations had believed answered only to the throne. "May I join you?" he asked at last. Evelyn looked up with surprised eyes before offering a small smile. "Of course, Your Majesty." Lucian sat upon the weathered stone bench beside her, leaving respectful space between them. Neither felt the need to rush into conversation. The peaceful sounds of the mountain forest filled the silence instead. Finally, the king spoke. "The day I ordered you away, I believed I was protecting tradition." Evelyn listened quietly. "Instead," he continued, "I nearly separated this kingdom from one of its greatest strengths." She gently shook her head. "I only cared for those who needed kindness." Lucian smiled, not with royal confidence, but with sincere admiration. "That is exactly what makes it extraordinary." The white beast slowly opened its silver eyes and looked from Lucian to Evelyn before resting its head once more upon the ground, completely content. Margaret Whitmore's ancient words returned to the king's thoughts. True guardians recognized hearts before titles. Looking around the peaceful kennels, he finally understood their meaning. Great kingdoms were not protected by crowns alone. They endured because ordinary people quietly chose compassion every single day. As winter slowly approached Frost Hollow once again, the story of the humble caretaker spread beyond the mountain fortress into villages, towns, and distant valleys. With every retelling, one lesson remained unchanged. Children remembered the 3 loyal wolf pups who never forgot the hands that had cared for them. Elders spoke of the legendary guardian that trusted kindness more than status. Parents reminded their families that genuine character could never be measured by wealth, position, or powerful names. Years later, visitors to Frost Hollow would often pause beside the restored iron gate that still stood at the entrance to the royal kennels. The old hinge that had shifted on that unforgettable morning had never been replaced. King Lucian had ordered it preserved exactly as it was, a quiet reminder that even the strongest barriers could yield before steadfast compassion. Whenever curious travelers asked why the damaged hinge remained, the older caretakers would simply smile toward the distant mountains where the white beast could sometimes be seen walking peacefully beside Evelyn and the grown wolves she had once raised from frightened pups. They would answer with the same simple truth every time. The greatest strength is gentle, and the truest loyalty will always find the heart that deserves it.